In this video, we're going to cover some of the key features and functions of Melodyne Essential. Welcome back, fellow fader finaglers. This is Robert McClellan, and you are tuned into the Home Studio Simplified channel. This channel exists to simplify the complexities of the home studio and to help you make professional sounding music in a less than professional space. I'd like to preface all of this by saying that this will not be an in-depth tutorial, but more just kind of skimming the surface and a few practical applications. I've included a link in the description of this video that will take you to the manufacturer's website, which has a huge playlist of in-depth tutorials on this very topic. One more thing before we get started, guys, there's actually a giveaway that's going on right now. I've included a link in the description of the video so that you can go and check out all of the details there. Now, let's get started. All right, let's talk about what Melodyne is and what it's actually used for. Melodyne is a plugin that allows you to edit and display audio material in a highly musical way. And what's remarkable about Melodyne is that it recognizes the notes in the audio data and displays them on pitch and time grids. Now, personally, I find that this is far more informative than the kind of display of amplitude values along a time axis offered by typical sample editors and audio sequencers. With Melodyne, you don't just see which parts of the recording are loud and which are quiet, you actually get to see where notes begin and where notes end, as well as the pitch of each note, and this obviously makes a huge difference. Due to this innovation, it is possible to not simply observe, but also to seize hold of and modify the notes displayed. If a tone is too flat, for example, you can simply drag it into the correct pitch, and if it's too short, you can even make it longer. Melodyne's note-based approach not only makes it a highly sensitive tool for correcting and optimizing your recordings, but also offers you the possibility of making profound changes to your audio material and even go as far as reconstructing it and creating from it something altogether new. Since the plugin's release, Melodyne has had an outstanding reputation for editing lead vocals. Why? Because it allows you to make corrections in a musical and intuitive manner that are virtually undetectable by the ear. However, the far-reaching implications of this plugin does not just stop at lead vocals, but it actually works wonders too on other sources, such as musical instruments. And once you've worked for a while with Melodyne, you'll realize that aside from the correction of errors, there's also a wealth of other valuable applications for you to explore. Here's just a few examples of other creative ways that you could use Melodyne. For instance, the creation of second voices or entire ensembles from copies of the original track. The introduction of melodic or harmonic variations when phrases have been repeated. You can even use it for correcting the timing of drums and bass. Take a deep dive into your drum tracks and you can actually tidy up rhythms and use quantization techniques to alter them. And going even a step further than that, you can literally create breaks and variations in those same drum loops. Now, aside from the few examples that I've just given you, obviously it shines on pitch shifting and time stretching as well. Essentially, there are three different versions of Melodyne that you can own. Melodyne Assistant and Essential will allow you to edit monophonic sound sources such as lead vocals, saxophone, bass, flute, etc., as well as rhythmic or unpitched audio material such as drum loops and percussion. Now, with Melodyne Editor, it actually offers you the possibility of intervening into the harmonies of polyphonic audio material in order, for example, to change a single note within a chord from a major to a minor third. Now, this is something that's completely unprecedented in the history of audio processing and introduces a wholly new dimension of creative freedom. Okay, hopping over to the screen now, you can see that there's actually two different ways that you can use Melodyne. You can use it as a standalone plugin, as seen here, or you can actually highlight a region and use it as a region effects, as found here. It's notable to mention that Melodyne is used in the same way as an audio insert effect and not an instrument plugin. The plugin runs in step with your DAW, which is ideal. If you want to perform and check your editing within context of a song, for instance, for this purpose, you can open as many instances of Melodyne simultaneously as the memory and processing power of your computer will permit. You'll find the standalone plugin in your computer's program folder after the installation takes place, and you simply use this version just like a sample editor. Launch the application, open your audio files, edit them, and then save them at the end. The standalone implementation makes it easier to handle samples independently of a song project. Likewise, thanks to Rewire support, it can also be connected to your DAW, which provides an alternative to running Melodyne as a plugin. You should take advantage of this possibility, by the way, if your DAW has no plugin interface or is incompatible with Melodyne, but does still support Rewire. Now, in terms of core functions, there's really no difference between the plugin and the standalone version of Melodyne. Both offer the same possibilities for editing your audio material. All right, let's take a look at the user interface and some of their functions. This area here is known as the editing pane, and these that you see on your screen are notes. This portion of the interface is the toolbox or the inspector area. The area located to the left here is the pitch ruler and scale area. And this area to the right is the zoom and scroll bars. Also, holding control and scrolling in with the mouse wheel will bring you in a little bit closer. Holding the Alt button and moving the scroll wheel will move the editing pane up and down. In order for Melodyne to work properly, the audio material must first of all be analyzed by Melodyne so that the notes within it can be detected and then later edited. The need for this preliminary analysis explains why Melodyne cannot be used as a real-time effect, like a reverb or a delay. Only after the material has been analyzed can the notes be displayed and Melodyne's functions brought into play. These, of course, do then operate in real time, and every change that you make within Melodyne to the audio notes takes effect immediately and can be heard without delay. With that being said, it's Melodyne itself that decides, based on its own analysis, what type of material that it's actually dealing with. You can, however, force it to adopt a different interpretation, if, say, the material is not displayed in the best way suited in the type of editing that you have in mind. And you can do that here under the Algorithm tab. When the detection process is complete, select a different algorithm from the algorithm menu to force a reinterpretation of the material. With that said, depending on the material, it can be necessary to edit the detection manually and reassign detected notes. This applies in particular to polyphonic material, in which overtones are sometimes interpreted as independent notes, and not all the notes actually played are invariably displayed. With melodic material, a note may occasionally be confused with the same note of an octave higher or lower. Therefore, before editing such material, you really need to reassign these notes to their corrected pitches, otherwise tonal artifacts could be produced when the material comes to be edited. The aim is to ensure that the notes you see in Melodyne correspond as closely as possible to the notes that are actually played. You'll notice that in the drop-down menu you can also set an algorithm that will come up by default. Now let's take a look at some of the navigation and the playback functions. So all the detected tones are displayed as what Melodyne calls blobs in the editing area. The size of the editing area can be altered and the blob display zoomed and scrolled as well. To resize the window, you can find any one of these corners and drag. Also, by holding the Control and Alt keys together, you'll see a magnifying glass appear which allows you to zoom in to a portion of the project. The slider on the right side and on the bottom is alterable by two different ways. For one, if you're in the middle, you can just simply scroll up and down. However, if you go to the edge, you'll notice that it changes into a magnifying glass, in which case clicking and holding will actually make things larger or smaller. The same can be done down at the bottom. By double-clicking one of the areas where the scroller is not present, you can also bring all of the notes into view. The small slider at the bottom, almost hidden out of sight, is actually for your blob magnification settings. By bringing this down, you can make your blobs smaller, and bringing it up will make them bigger. To set the position of the playback cursor, click anywhere in this bar up here. From here, you can also double-click the bar to start the playback from the place where you just clicked. I don't have to climb a mountain. By holding the Alt button and double-clicking anywhere in the bar ruler, you can play back the current selection. And as is common with most DAWs, pressing the space bar will either allow the plugin to be played back or it will stop the plugin altogether. You can cycle through the various blobs on the editor's pane by using the arrow keys on your keyboard. And lastly, you can click and drag in the bar ruler to actually scrub through the audio. Both the standalone version and the plugin version offer a cycle mode. With the plugin version, however, you can only activate cycle mode when the DAW is stopped. I'll show you how that works now. Underneath your ruler up here, you have a secondary ruler here. If I was to double click a portion here, you'll notice that it's highlighted in white. I can then click and drag that to any number of measures. And to move the looping area altogether, I can click in the middle and drag it to wherever I'd like. By holding the Alt key, it removes the snap functionality. As you can see here, the snap is enabled. By holding the Alt key, however, it moves freely along the timeline. Likewise, by holding the Shift button and clicking on one of these squares, I can either lengthen or shorten it by where I click. And lastly, if I hold the Shift button and double click, it will move to the last selected blob on the editor pane. By holding Shift and Alt and double clicking, it will also move to the beginning of the note. The blobs in this editing area can be selected using all of the standard techniques such as clicking each individual or holding Shift and clicking several at the same time, and it even goes as far as doing a lasso selection. Likewise, by going to the Edit section, you have the ability to select all of the blobs from here. You also have special selection options, such as selecting all blobs within the same note. Melodyne also offers you the ability to cut, copy, and paste blobs. If prior to pasting a blob, you select another, when you paste, the former will replace the latter. Now, if no blob is selected at the time of the pasting, the source blob will be pasted at the cursor position. If, however, the blob was offset from the grid prior to copying, it will be offset from the playback cursor after pasting and by the same amount. If you want the insert point and the cursor position to coincide exactly, set the time grid to seconds prior to pasting. You can find that option here under Options, Time Grid, Seconds. The great thing about the interface with Melodyne too is that if you're unsure about what something does, usually you can hover over it and it'll give you a brief description of what exactly it does. Now let's talk a little bit about the pitch grid and the scale functions. Now in Melodyne, you can change the pitch of notes either continuously or in such a way that they snap to a grid. If the snap function is active, notes can only be moved to pitches they are allowed to by the grid. The grid can be based on the chromatic scale or the scale of C major or any other scale. Melodyne offers you a wide choice of scales and a comprehensive set of functions for the editing and creation of those scales, which even includes the ability to use the scale detective to identify a scale used in one recording and apply it to another. Now, all of these functions and options are reached via the pitch ruler by right-clicking in this area here. You can also find it in a secondary menu under Options and Pitch Grid. This is the tempo box. Next to the tempo box, there's a button that opens a tempo dialog. Both the box and the dialog have distinct functions in the Melodyne standalone and the Melodyne plugin. In the plugin, the box is merely a display. It cannot be adjusted because the tempo is determined by your DAW. When the tempo of the DAW changes, you should open the dialog and inform the Melodyne plugin of the nature and intent of the change. For instance, have you simply selected a new constant tempo, or is a tempo progression, a gradual tempo change, intended? This will come in handy when editing drums or percussive style instruments. Alright, so now that we've looked at most of the basic controls, let's go ahead and look into using this in a real-world application on a lead vocal. It's important to note that working in small chunks of audio at a time is actually going to be less CPU intensive, and it's going to save you a lot of hunting and pecking to try to find out where you're at on the editor timeline. So by moving in small chunks of audio, you're going to help yourself out in the long run. All right, so I've highlighted this first portion of audio that we're going to work with, and I'm going to go to Region Effects, Melodyne, and Create Region Effects. Okay, that brings this screen up here, in which case I'm just going to click and drag to the top. And it looks like there's definitely some areas that do need some help on this lead vocal. So one of the first things that I like to do is just hold Control A and then actually move all of those into their pitch center at 100% just to see what it sounds like. And remember, all of this can be undone.
I don't have to climb a mountain to be that close to you. 'Cause even in the valley, I can praise you too.
Okay, so everything sounded good except for that last phrase. So I'm going to go back to this last phrase here. I think that was actually meant to be there. Let's take a listen to that.
I can praise you too.
Much better. So as we just seen, using Melodyne is really pretty straightforward. See how it sounds and then move the notes around that didn't quite meet up to your standards. And we actually did that from this menu right here. This is your correct pitch macro. You can also use this bottom slider to correct the pitch drift. Now my voice naturally has a quiver to it, so I'm going to go ahead and try and use that just to see if it yields any good results. Once again, Control A. You'll notice that it doesn't move dramatically, but it does at least do something. So let's take a listen to what that sounds like.
Mountain to be that close to you, 'cause even in the valley I can praise you too. I don't have to see you sing.
Okay, that doesn't sound bad at all. I do think that it sounded a little bit more natural though before I did that, but there were some areas that benefited from it. So I think I'll take it down to about half or around there. And I'll probably just leave that just like it is. Now, the good thing about this is once you put the region effect on there, you can actually go back and print it by going to Render Region Effects. This then saves all of the changes that you've just made to the vocal without eating up any more of your CPU. However, I'm not going to do that just yet because I want to let this sink in and let it set for a little bit while longer, come back and listen to it a couple more times before I officially say, okay, I'm ready to render this. From past experiences, I have learned that I haven't always done that. And then what happens is you actually can ruin a vocal that you can't get back unless you go to a previous session. Which brings me to another good point. Before you begin to use Melodyne, it's actually a safe practice to save your project beforehand, maybe with a name that's applicable to what you're getting ready to do. So you could say vocal track lay down and save it, then go ahead and do your Melodyne changes and save it as vocal track with Melodyne. Something of that nature. At least then you know that you have a good starting point that you can always go back to if something should get messed up with the Melodyne. Now, another cool benefit of Melodyne is the fact that you can not only use it as a pitch editor, but also as a timing editor. So if I open those region effects back up, you'll notice that some of these notes are not necessarily aligned to the grid. They're not falling within the proper time. Now, obviously, you don't want to overdo this and sound too robotic. However, there are times when just a slight variation or a change can make something set a little bit better in the mix. Another cool thing that you can do with Melodyne is you can actually use it as a MIDI creator. What I mean by this is, let's say if I wanted to just take a variation of a melody maybe that I had in my head and record it onto this track, I could then transfer that into MIDI information. Let me demonstrate real quickly. Boop, 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 boop. Okay. I'm going to insert region effects. Copy MIDI events. Now I'm going to bring that down here and paste it. Although that wasn't a perfect rendition of what I just did, it was pretty close. And this could be the perfect solution to replacing that missing note that might be missing off of a bass line. Now, this isn't limited to vocals and beatboxing alone, but this can also be used on a wide variety of instruments. So for instance, I could take a bass line, run it through Melodyne, copy the region effects, and use that same bass line on another bass. Let me demonstrate. I'm going to insert Melodyne on this bass line. Now I'm going to simply go up to Region Effects and copy MIDI events. Then I'll simply paste the MIDI events into the Studio Instruments bass guitar VSTI. Right here. Another way that I can do this is just simply by clicking and dragging the Melodyne portion down to this track. It automatically creates MIDI events based off of the Melodyne information. Now, having saved my project as vocals Melodyne, I can go ahead and render the region effects, remove that load from the CPU. You'll notice that in the upper left-hand corner of this clip of audio, it has been denoted that it's already been edited with Melodyne once. This can be useful for future reference. Now I'm just going to go ahead and move on down the line with the rest of these vocals. Well guys, I hope that you found this brief tutorial on Melodyne Essential helpful. If you did, give me a thumbs up and let me know about that. Also, if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe and hit the bell icon so that every time I upload a new video, you'll be the first to know.